Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start our Metro Atlanta Speaks results webinar in just a minute. So everyone just hold on for 1 second. We'll let some more people join the webinar and we will get started. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Metro Atlanta Speaks Results 2020. We're coming to you live from all over the Atlanta region this afternoon as a part of our ongoing series hosted by the Atlanta Regional Commission. You can visit our website to find past webinars and to register for upcoming sessions. I'll post a link to ARC's webinar library page in the chat box in just a minute. But first, I'd like to just go over a couple of housekeeping items before we jump into today's session. So we've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee control panel. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. Throughout the webinar, you will have the opportunity to submit text questions or comments by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You can send your questions at any time during the presentation and I'll collect them and the panelists will address them during the Q&A session towards the end of the session. You'll be able to chat with us in that window as well. So one thing to note, for our current meeting, all attendees have joined in listen-only mode, and so you will be on mute for today's webinar. During the Q&A period, please type your questions into that question box and the panelists will answer them from there. A few other things to note: if you do click away to another application or browser and you have trouble finding the meeting again, look for the blue flower like this one, or if you're on a Mac, it might be yellow. The icon, it should be at the bottom or side of your screen, or look in one of the open browser tabs. The orange colored arrow on the control panel for this software will collapse and open the control panel, and you can move it to another part of your screen if that's what you'd like to do. Today's meeting and all of ARC webinar series webinars will be recorded through the GoToWebinar platform. The recording will be made available to all meeting attendees via a follow-up email and will also be posted to ARC's webinar page on the website. Now I would like to turn it over to Maria Supporta. Maria is the editor of the Supporta report and is a longtime Atlanta business, civic, and urban affairs journalist with a deep knowledge of our city, our region, and state. She is now at work with a stellar board to establish a nonprofit journalism website, the Atlanta Civic Circle, which will provide civic literacy on key local issues with the hope of encouraging greater civic engagement. Maria spent 27 years with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and 11.5 years with the Atlanta Business Chronicle. And she'll be joined today by Mike Alexander and Mike Carnathan and Malika Wilkins of ARC. So I'm going to turn it over now to Maria.
Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. We've got an all-star cast here, and I'm going to quickly do the introductions. There's Michael 1, I call him Michael Alexander, Managing Director of the Atlanta Regional Commission Center for Livable Communities. In this role, he leads a multidisciplinary professional staff in the fields of transportation planning, environmental planning, community development, economics, and demographic forecasting. Mike has over 20 years of public policy experience focused on regional and local community planning. Mike number 2 is Mike Carnathan. Mike Carnathan is Senior Manager of Research and Analytics Division at the Atlanta Regional Commission. He is also one of the founders of Neighborhood Nexus, which is a community intelligence system for Metro Atlanta with the goal of fostering a data-driven decision-making culture in the region and beyond. Neighborhood Nexus provides data, tools, and expertise as a catalyst to create opportunity for all of our region's citizens. And last but not least is Malika Reed Wilkins. Malika is a Senior Director of the Atlanta Regional Commission's Center for Strategic Relations. She also heads the agency's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. As Senior Director, she leads staff in the areas of local government affairs, corporate engagement and community engagement, marketing and communications, digital strategy, and creative. Dr. Wilkins has more than 23 years of public policy and strategic organizational communications experience in the public and nonprofit sectors. We will begin today's webinar with getting a presentation from the Mike duo and Malika about the results of the Metro Atlanta Speaks survey. So Mike and Malika, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I didn't know that much about my colleagues. No, I'm just joking. But so happy to be here this afternoon. I'm really excited, and I'll kick us off, and all three of us will engage in this this information that we're very excited to share with you. And I'm mostly excited for you all here on the panel today, because we hope that you leave here today more informed and inspired to spark more conversation around the information we're going to share with you. And just to give you a little bit of context, if you go to the next slide, Mike, Metro Atlanta, and I don't know who's, okay, Metro Atlanta Speaks is one of a myriad of ways that the Atlanta Regional Commission reaches out and engages the community. This slide is not up here for you to remember every logo, but it is up here for you to understand all of the touch points that the ARC has throughout this region. And we're very proud of that, but we can't do it without you all. And so we're very appreciative of the support that you have provided us year after year. But as you can see in the top corner there, Metro Atlanta Speaks has a huge impact, but it is only one way that we engage in the community. And so we're very grateful to have been able to make this our 8th year of issuing this survey. I mean, we started back in 2013, and as you can see, the Mike and Mikes started this way back then. I hate to say way back for 2013, but it feels like that for 20. And we're in our 8th year, nearly a decade of getting and gaining these insights for the 10-county region. And for those of you who have followed us over those years, you know that the Metro Atlanta Speaks survey covers so many different areas, from the economy to public health to safety, crime, race relations, transportation, etc. And we've just done that for years. But we all know this year was different, very different. 2020, I don't think any of us will ever forget it. And so we knew that we also had to make some adjustments to this instrument in order to get even a deeper understanding of the impacts of this big global pandemic is having even on our region. And so as we look at the impacts from an economic standpoint, from a public health standpoint, and even some of those public health disparities, we also delved a little deeper race relations to get more insights into that area. And I don't want to steal the thunder, but you'll see a lot of that that we will share with you today. So with that, I will go ahead and get started. And I will start us off, and you'll hear us. This will be a conversation with three of us. And then at the end, we hope to be able to entertain some questions. So let's start off with the big deal. What is the biggest problem facing the region? We asked, and we received over 4,000 responses from about 4,400. And public health, as you can see, for this cohort of folks that we asked and responded to, said that the biggest problem was public health, and then crime to follow, and the economy. So keep this in mind just for an overall picture. Just overall, public health was the biggest problem in terms of perception facing the region. Next slide. But let's look at the differences between 2020 and 2019. There are some big differences here. Let's look at the first one, the elephant in the room, transportation. Transportation in 2019, a third of our region felt that it was the biggest issue. Look at 2020. It's a big jump in the other direction. But when you look at the economy, public health, and race relations, all of those three areas had significant increases in terms of perception around what's the biggest issues, what are issues in our region. Let's look at public health. It had a % jump. When you look at the economy, 8%. When you look at race relations, 8%. So we had several major areas that just leaped up into those top tier areas in terms of the biggest issues that is perceived to be the biggest issues in our region. And so that is very telling of 2020, right? That's very telling. And so it was definitely something that we that intrigued us as we move through this presentation. Next slide. Let's break this down a little bit more. So as we look at the suburban counties, if you will, the Rockdales, the Fayette, the Gwinnett's, the Cherokee, public health is in that top tier around what those residents believe to be the biggest problems for our region. And so as you look at that, but as you look further down in this scale here, Henry County, let's look there, where 19% of the folks that responded to this who reside in Henry County believe that race relations is the biggest issue for our region. And when you look at Clayton County and the economy, 20% of folks that reside in Clayton believe that the economy is the biggest issue. So when you see these differences here by geography, by location, keep that of note as we go through this presentation, because we're going to pull out some more information as it relates to these respective counties and the counties in our region, as well as the city of Atlanta. So I'll let that there for about a second or two to kind of, if you have some notes you want to take from that. Next slide. Now, as we looked at it from a geography standpoint, from a location standpoint, let's look at these differences from an age cohort. Those that are in the 18 to 34-year-old range, as you can see, believe that what the biggest problems were public health and race relations. When you look at the top two, and human services. And so that is something that stood out for this age group. I like to think I'm still in that age group, but I'm not. But, but Mike, yeah, okay, I see him shaking his head. All right, I know. But look at this difference. And when you go to the next slide, and our residents who are 65 years of age or older, look at the differences here of their perception of what the biggest problems are for the region: crime and public health, which public health pervaded through pretty much every age cohort, but the number one areas changed a bit here. And so as we talked about, as I said earlier, about we hope that at the end of this, you are inspired to have more conversations in your communities of, varying conversations. We hope that this can help sort of support that and guide those conversations. Next slide. And then let's look at, so we've looked at it from a geographic standpoint, the locations in terms of the counties. And then we just saw some really stark differences in age. And now let's look at the perception by race. And so when we look at African Americans and what is perceived to be the biggest part of our region, number one in that area, in that ethnicity, in that race, is crime. For white people in our region that responded to this survey, it is public health. And for the Latinx and Latinx and Latin American in our region, it is also public health. And as you can see, all three have sort of the same perceptions there, but how they are prioritized and tiered is different. And so that is another point of note to take as we sort of unbundle this data, is to be able to look at it from a racial perspective, to be able to look at this from an age perspective, as well as location. And there are some other variables that we probably won't have time to go into today, but there are other variables as well. But just wanted to point those out in terms of this. And go ahead, Mike.
Malika, before we go to the next slide, I think it's critical for everyone to remember that we actually were polling people in late July and early August. And we did it very quickly. But if you think about all the racial tension and really national news around all those things that we know that were happening in America besides the pandemic, you know, people were seeing that on their TV screens, they were seeing it in their social media, and I think it had a big influence this year in the way people were responding to this question, which is actually about the region. And we just, you know, I always have to keep that in mind after 8 years, that the national news, national information can have a big impact on how people perceive the region and their own community.
That's a good point, Mike.
Yeah, and I'll chime in here since we're lingering on the slide a little bit, and I like the way that Malika talked about it. Is like, you know, one of the reasons why this is one of the richest data sets we have at Atlanta Regional Commission is because you can unbundle this, and you can really begin to look at some of these issues in really deeper depth. Like, for example, yes, crime, economy, public health, they all ranked in the top 3 for each of the races and ethnicities. But if you dig deeper, you'll see that, you know, Black respondents and the Latinx respondents were more likely to say public education was a top issue. They were also more likely to say that human services were a top issue. And then, you know, for white respondents, you know, white respondents were more likely to say that transportation is the top issue. And so you really begin, you know, as you dig deeper into this data set, you really begin to see how people are perceiving life in Metro Atlanta with completely different experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Next slide. So as we and my colleagues will also chime in on this slide as we sort of transition the presentation a bit, you know, really, I'll just point out and then pivot over to my colleagues, is that really for the first time, as I said in that second slide where we compared the 2019 and 2020 results, something other than transportation was indicated as the biggest problem for me. And not to say that it didn't rank, it did. But, you know, in terms of what's happening this year, it just was not perceived as the biggest problem amongst the people that responded to this survey. And I think that's significant. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, when we started this survey way back when, we were coming out of the Great Recession still. And the first year we asked it, the economy was the #1 response. And we watched it fall all these years until this year. And so we all know this pandemic was serious, but you're absolutely seeing it. Everybody has felt it. And that's why this survey, like Malika has said so well, is so critical.
And then, crime remained one of those top four, one of those top issues in four jurisdictions. And it was by far the biggest issue for the older age cohorts. And so again, this goes back to the point that Malika was making earlier. It's the conversations that we need to be having, because, while public health is top of mind for, say, younger persons of color in this region, crime is still an issue for some older age cohorts. And depending on where you live, it is more important than public health, even during a pandemic. So those are the things that we need to suss out.
Now, Mike, you worked a lot with crime data though. And what's been the national trend for crime itself versus really kind of the messaging that you would get if you turn on the TV?
Right. I mean, and you're right. And that's one of the reasons we do this survey, is to sort of verify, validate sort of what the hard data is telling us versus the perception data. And the simple fact of the matter is crime is going down. It has been going down for years and years and years. And so I do think it gets back to your point, Mike, that just people, watching the news, seeing what was happening over the summer, that certainly, I do believe, tainted how they responded to this biggest problem question.
And it really speaks to that fourth bullet, if I can read that correctly. The perception between our younger residents of Metro Atlanta and older really does have this fundamental break between this idea of race relations and, I think, crime. And it's something I know Malika and Mike and I have been talking a lot about, and trying to make sure everybody understands this in the best way possible, because this is a fundamental place we need to be in, thinking about how we communicate with each other.
Yeah, and then finally, for the last bullet, and we're going to be talking a lot about that, there's just big differences also in how survey participants answered, for race relations as the biggest issue. So, and we'll be talking a lot about that as we go along, but let's move forward. And one of the questions we asked, and again, like Malika said earlier, this 2020 is different. This is a brand new question this year, because we wanted to understand what impact the pandemic was having on people's employment status. So we asked them, did you lose your job? Were you furloughed? Did you experience cuts in pay or hours? And they could answer any of them. So you could select multiple options. And then what we find, it's right here. You'll see that about 2 in 3 participants of this survey said that they had some significant employment impact due to the pandemic. And that, to me, is just a staggering number. And then if you look at it jurisdiction by jurisdiction, you'll see respondents who live in Clayton County, almost 85% of those workers had some sort of impact to their employment status, which again is just staggering.
We couldn't. Go ahead, Malika.
No, I was just saying that just hits so deep. When you think about what you just said and just looking at this slide, I mean, I grew up in Clayton County. I went to all the Clayton County public schools, and not to talk about Clayton, but just overall looking at the entire region, how nearly 70% of was impacted in terms of their employment. I mean, it's just staggering. It's just sobering to me. Sorry, I just reacted to that, Mike.
Yeah,
right. Go ahead, Mike.
First time I saw this, I just fundamentally didn't believe it. I knew it, but to see that number above 80%, I never thought I would see this type of chart in our work through Metro Atlanta Speaks.
And it just goes and verifies what we're learning about the pandemic, and it's that the low-income workers in Clayton County has a preponderance of low-income workers living there, but low-income workers are taking a beating during this pandemic economy. And this is these impacts aren't equitably distributed across races and ethnicities either. So you'll see Black workers, Latinx workers are significantly more likely to have experienced some sort of employment impact. And then if you look at it by age, sort of the same thing that we're seeing throughout the survey is that the younger age cohorts are being disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. So Micah, you want to handle this one?
Yeah, and so, Mike and I, when we're often speaking, we'll use these maps that show things like median household income and poverty. And Mike, I think, coined this, the map stays the same. And really the controlling variable is always household income. And in this survey, what we're seeing is these charts stay the same as well. And if you could just really stay with it, Mike, and go back up to very quickly, just to give you that moment where you go up to 12. One more. Look at the chart, look at the rank, job impacts. Now go back to housing. And this really is about this complete understanding of a household or a person's life and the impact of this pandemic, this recession. And I know that Clayton County's household income is about $48,000 a year. Fayette County, just to the west, is about $100,000. All of the other jurisdictions besides Clayton County all have household incomes above $60,000 a year. And so Mike and I know disproportionately Clayton County is where low-income workers live. They often travel long distances to go to work. And of course, their economic conditions are much, much more in the margins. So one potential economic impact can really put them in jeopardy. And jeopardy means, in this case, likely to not be able to afford their mortgage, right? And so we know that food insecurity really impacted young people and low-income households much more quickly than we would have thought during this pandemic. And of course, we know now looming is really this impact that's going to happen through the eviction filings and people's inability, not just in Metro Atlanta, nationally, to really maintain their rent payments. And of course, Clayton County and the city of Atlanta disproportionately impacted. So, almost the twice in percentage terms, the number of people that don't feel confident at all or only slightly confident that they can make next month's rent. And of course, this survey was done in July and August, but these numbers have roughly held. And just like Mike said earlier, with the jobs impacts, the employment impact, it's the same impact by race or ethnicity. Almost 1 in 4 Black residents in Metro Atlanta don't feel like they can make their next mortgage or rent payment. And you compare that to just 10% for white households. So Black households, Latinx, and other, which does include Asians, being more impacted than white households in Metro Atlanta.
Right, and you had mentioned food insecurity, and again, I hope you're just taking a look at just the kind of the rankings that we're seeing jurisdiction by jurisdiction, because once again, we see Clayton County ranking near the top, along with the city of Atlanta, along with DeKalb, in terms of the percent of respondents who had to receive food from a food bank since March. And again, I just think that some of these numbers that we're seeing is pretty staggering. Again, you see the differences by jurisdiction, and of course these differences persist across races and ethnicities, like they have been with every question we've asked. So Black residents, Latinx residents are more likely than white residents to have received food from a food bank. I'm sorry, Malika.
I apologize. Sorry about that. But I just want to add something to what you said too is, I know this was done in July, but we're seeing a national trend as well in food insecurity. I mean, it is not, as we're seeing over the last couple of months, it is not just a low income problem or anything. We're seeing, people of all statuses having to get in the food bank lines. I know you've seen some of that on the national news. And so this is very telling, even in the summer when we, was able to get this data even now, as we get deeper into the pandemic, we're seeing on a large scale, I would assume some of these numbers are even higher if we were to ask people again right now. So just wanted to sort of note that, and many of you on the line may have also read and seen where throughout our country, just the ability to provide for your family and feed your family has just been a struggle for all levels.
Yeah, and we've heard anecdotally from our friends at the food, at the Metro Atlanta Community Food Bank that, they've pretty much doubling their distribution of food during this pandemic, which again just speaks to the severity of this pandemic. And again, just to point out once again, younger age cohorts are more likely to struggle with food insecurity.
Yeah, and I think that was surprising for us, wasn't it, Mike, given a lot of the work we do in
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then we're just going back to that percent of respondents saying that race relations was the region's biggest problems. And then here, I think this is fascinating, and Malika's going to piggyback here, but if you look at the 4 jurisdictions who were most likely to say race relations is the region's biggest problems, well, they're suburban counties: Henry County, Rockdale, Douglas, Clayton. They're more likely to say that race relations is the region's biggest problem. But we asked this question in a more direct way, and I'll let Malika talk about this.
Yeah, so go back once, because I want people to see that previous slide. Like I said, like when we think about really the suburban counties, if you will, with Henry, Rockdale, Douglas, Henry being is nearly 20%, responding that race relations is the biggest problem. But when you go to the next slide and you get a bit more specific about what that means, asking respondents if they agree that discrimination, specifically Black people, is a serious problem, look at what the scale tells us here. It moves from suburban to urban, if you will. The city of Atlanta having, about 65% that strongly agree. But when you go back to the counties of the slide before, Henry and Rockdale, et cetera, they're on the lower spectrum of this particular slide. So I just, when we were talking about this as a team, the 3 of us, we were saying, wow, this is where sort of the rubber meets the road in those conversations. That's why, being able to, have these sort of big overarching messages need to be extrapolated, like how they did so beautifully here in this survey, where you ask specifically, do respondents agree that discrimination against Black people is a serious problem? And, why is there a difference here in response? And that's the beauty of this type of quantitative data, is to help spark that qualitative conversation, to help spark those conversations, to get a deeper understanding of why it came out this way. And so I'm curious as well, but it was fascinating for us to see this sort of flip, if you will, talking about a similar issue. And so again here, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, go ahead, Malika.
I was just going to say again here, respondents saying that discrimination against Black people is a serious problem. So you can see, of course, Black people here, according to the data that we received, about 75% of Black people, agree with this, strongly agree, followed by Latinx. And then we see about 35% of white people also agree with this. So again, the beauty of this type of data and information is for us to be able to take this and and again, be inspired to have those conversations to give us a starting point of where to begin. And I think what this does is does just that, to give us that starting point, if you will.
And once again, we see, big differences in age and how people answered this discrimination question, with the younger age cohorts more likely to strongly agree that discrimination against Black people is a serious problem.
Yeah, and Mike, you might speak for just a second about, if you want to go back, about the differences in race and ethnicity by age in this region.
That's a good point. If you look at the younger age cohorts, they are majority persons of color, whereas you look at the older age cohorts, there's a majority white populations. And so we're definitely seeing those differences in age and race really correlated very strongly in how people and how respondents are answering these questions. And I know, Mike A., this is one of your favorite questions, so I'll turn this over to you.
Yeah, and I don't know if Catherine Lawler's on this call today, but I think she sent me this very academic article where some scientists have been asking this question in different forms for a number of years. And I was fascinated by this because it does speak to this idea of how people perceive equity in the United States through this idea of what people actually think other people have in terms of wealth. And so it was a very hard question for us to ask. I mean, Malik, I sent you all the kind of a thread of how we were debating before the survey went out how to ask this, and I wanted to ask it just like the academics did, and we did, and we figured out how to talk about it. And so when you see this, know that we spent a lot of time with this question. But the first thing to point out is, if you are comparing a white household to a Black household, the national level, the average Black household has 10% of the wealth of a white household. And that's an incredible fact in this country. And if you think about all the things that we love about America, really having access to capital through wealth is fundamental for your ability to educate yourself, educate your family members, to take the opportunity to form and start a business. And so this disparity in wealth is critical for our understanding of economic, right, potential economic equity in the most fundamental way. And so there are dramatic differences in our perceptions of this. Now, we don't have a slide in that I have in my other decks, but I'll go ahead and tell you this. This is a hard question to answer accurately. Most people don't know this. So a very good answer is to say, I don't know. And what I can tell you is, by education, people with a high school diploma or less actually were most likely to respond, I don't know. And the more education you have, the more likely you were to be certain in your responses. And that certainty led you to be more wrong in responding.
Yeah.
And so this is absolutely fascinating, and it's built into the dashboard Mike's going to show you at the end. But Cherokee County, which is a majority white county in our suburban communities, so the average white household would have a very similar response. But an average household in Cherokee County thinks that a Black household has 65% of the wealth. Well, Clayton County, which has the lowest share of white households, actually answered the question most correctly, but still pretty wrong, in responding that they thought it was 41%. So big disparities at the county and city level for people's understanding of this fundamental disparity in the economic wealth in the United States. So if you'll go to the next slide. And so, of course, white people have the least understanding of this wealth inequity. And of course, Black people have the best understanding. And that's what you see because they're closer to that actual 10% number, right? And again, this is fundamental for us as we start to think about all these systems and how they function. And All the things we've already told you about the disparate impacts of this recession, this pandemic on people of color, this points to that. And it's that much harder for, in particular, Black people in Metro Atlanta, which make up 40% of the population in the 10-county area, to make up this ground from this recession, knowing that they're already really in a place where that wealth isn't there at the household level for them in the same way that it is for a white household.
Right.
I want to move to questions pretty.
Oh, yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I'm going to take us home real quick. And so the final question we have is, just about a question about how optimistic we are for the future. And this is where it's just us asking, will things be better, worse, or the same in 3 to 4 years? And we always want to see more people thinking it's going to be better than worse. And that's exactly what we see. And you'll see the differences once again, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And you'll see persons of color are more likely to be more optimistic that things will be better in 3 to 4 years. And then finally, as Mike was saying, we do want you to come and explore this data for yourself. Like I said, this is one of the richest data sets we have. So we built a dashboard so you can do your own data exploration. You can get it right here on this web page. And also just make sure that you look at our blog, 33n.atlantaregional.com, because we're going to be doing a lot of sort of data journalism on this blog, exploring these topics in more depth. And now I will turn it over to Maria Supporta so we can get into some of these questions that you guys may have.
Well, one of the questions that came in is how big is the sample size? And, we're so used to hearing, the margin of error issue. Tell us how good your numbers are.
Yeah, so 4,400 folks across 11 jurisdictions, including the city of Atlanta. So really across the 10 counties, and that's just a massive survey. That's the biggest survey of its kind in this region that I can remember. And so that means the regionally, the margin of error is about plus or minus 1.5%.
Yeah.
And then another question.
The margin of error for the counties is plus or minus 5%. So that's, when you're looking at the county level data, you can feel good about it as well. And that's something we're truthfully, as data geeks, pretty proud of, that we continue to maintain that level of accuracy, trying to fund this survey every year.
Okay, and then another question was, do we have baseline numbers, pre-COVID numbers, for the food bank or for making rent, income insecurity, which I guess we could really look to the 2019 Metro Atlanta Speaks as a baseline. Can y'all share real quickly the change over time, pre-COVID to, we're not post-COVID yet, we're still during COVID.
Right, yeah, now I can get into a little bit of that. We didn't ask that many questions that carried over from previous surveys, because we did want to focus on COVID and the kind of the path forward, post-COVID. But, we did ask the biggest problem, and, we talked about that at length earlier, about how that has fundamentally changed. Mm-hmm. We did ask about the future and the kind of the optimism, and people are more optimistic that things will get better in 3 to 4 years. Of course, that's a very rational answer. How can things get worse than 2020? But we did ask a lot of frequent flyer questions, right?
Yeah.
So we did lose some of that time series, but we'll pick those back up in future surveys.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Malika. I was
just going to think about last year's survey. I believe it was about, and help me if I'm wrong, Mike, 20% or so of folks in the region that said they could not afford an unexpected bill of $400. I know that's not apples to apples, but when you think about the impacts of COVID and looking at the slide with food security and some of those other things, I'd imagine if we asked that again, you know, what the numbers would be on that in this environment. And so, you know, it's just something to think about as we think about, you know, just overall financial stability and economic stability for our region.
I wanted
Right.
to ask, I wanted to ask about getting a little bit more granular about some of the numbers, because I know that you include Fulton County as one entity, DeKalb County as one entity, even the city of Atlanta as one entity. But isn't there a great difference between North Fulton and South Fulton, between North DeKalb and South DeKalb, between North Atlanta and South Atlanta? Isn't there a big line that divides our region in terms of economic prosperity, educational attainment, health outcomes? And how can we better explain that picture, that portrait of our region?
Yes.
Yes. Mike, you're never short for words when
Yes. No, and you know, this is fundamental in a lot of the work that we do. And you know, I get to work for one of the greatest people I know, Doug Hooker, and he's already done my review in saying that. And one of the first things he said when he came on board is he would like to see economic development on the south side similar to the north side. And he's asked us a number of times to rework data to show those differences. And we know, you know, more than 70% of the jobs in the region are north of I-20. And a lot of our forecast models expect that to change. So when you hear us talking about the Aerotropolis Alliance, which is something Doug is heavily invested in, it's us trying to bend that needle to really foster more growth, more high quality growth into the southern part of the region to get at those issues. Because we do know that, you know, a disproportionate share of the high paying jobs are up in our northern job centers. And the people that we talked about in Clayton County are often, you know, making that long commute up to those job centers. And Mike made a map that we can't show today to show during the pandemic where people, low income workers, had lost their jobs the most. Mike, you want to talk about that for a second?
Well, I mean, you know, low income workers, you know, they live everywhere throughout the region. But I mean, it's, again, you know, we talk about making, you know, 10,000 different maps in my career. Mike and I, probably between the two of us, have made 100,000 maps in our 40 years of working at ARC. But really, really one map could suffice. And it shows exactly what you're talking about, Maria, just that north-south divide. It doesn't matter if it's education, if it's health, if it's income, the maps look the same. And unfortunately, with this survey, we're kind of stuck at the county level, just for, you know, statistical significance and, you know, the data nerd egghead kind of talk. But yes, we absolutely recognize the big differences north-south, Fulton, north-south DeKalb.
And how does one take that information and put the overlay about Atlanta being known as one of the greatest, the cities with one of the greatest income inequality and the least amount of economic mobility? How does that overlay fit with what the numbers that you presented to us? Is it really focused on certain parts of our region where those issues are the greatest?
I mean, I think you're seeing it when you start slicing it up by, you know, in particular by race and by age. You know, again, those younger age cohorts is majority persons of color. Older age cohorts are majority white. And if you look at it by jurisdiction, we have a very distinct footprint of where, you know, younger folks and persons of color live. And that's where, you know, where Metro Atlanta speaks, where we're really slicing that data up. That really does speak to what you're talking about, Maria, about us being, you know, sort of at the bottom of upward economic mobility.
And
So you
in
talked
particular,
about how real,
say that.
I was just going to say, you talked about how the 100,000 maps that the Mike duo has done over the years could really just be one map. Are we
Yeah,
seeing
in
that?
fact, can Olivia or Jared, can you make me the presenter for just a second? Maybe.
We're going off script here. This is
This is all dangerous, but that's all right. It's
This
needed.
is COVID.
That's right. Thanks, Mike.
Can you guys see that map?
yep.
Yes.
That's the map.
Yeah.
That is always the map. And what it is it's just median household income. If you look up the 400 corridor, you see that huge, huge area of high income households. And yeah, we are a little off script, but that's the power of the webinars. And this is the map. And when we click through this, educational attainment, it's the same map. Housing values, it's the same map. No health insurance, the colors flip, but it's the same map. And of course, poverty, it's the same map, just like our charts we showed earlier. And this is that spatial challenge. And Maria, you brought it up, but this is the thing that we talk the most about, is trying to address this. And that's why when Doug sees these maps, and the way we respond to this is, you know, how can we bend this trend that is so powerful in the way we allocate resources spatially across this region, right?
And we are looking at changing demographics in our region. And I know some of it we've seen play out politically, but there is, you know, Clayton went from being a white county to basically being overwhelmingly majority Black. We're seeing some of those changes. We've seen Cobb changing demographically, Gwinnett now becoming a majority minority county. Are we going to start seeing that spatial map of the region change with having maybe more minorities living north of I-20? Or is that not apparent? If you live north of I-20, you're just going to be better off, whether you're white or Black or Latino or Asian. I don't know. What are y'all finding?
Mike, do you want to respond to that? Because the
I'll
pattern,
let you respond to that. You're the guy showing the maps anyway. No, I mean, that's a great question, Maria. And what we haven't seen evidence of that yet. Now, when we do our forecasting, we look 30 years into the future to try to figure out what kind of place Metro Atlanta is going to be. And what we found is, you know, the vast majority of growth. In fact, all of the growth that we're going to be getting in this region in the next 30 years is going to come from persons of color, from non-white populations. In fact, we're actually forecasting a slight decline in overall white population in this region out to 2050. And that mirrors the trends that's happening nationally as well. And as Mike said, you know, one of the kind of the imperatives is to better balance that future growth more north-south, so we can begin to see some of those geographic disparities disappear. But hey, it took us generations to sort of build this system that we have in Metro Atlanta, and it's going to take us a while to undo that system as well.
yeah, I mean,
but all the demographic trends are pointing in the right direction.
the change in wealth at the national level by race or ethnicity hasn't really improved.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, over the long term, if the system's working for everyone, then those gaps would start to change a little bit.
That's right.
And that's a critical point. So when we look at home ownership, just for example, and I don't want to cut you off, but like there's still a 20% gap in the home ownership rate in Metro Atlanta between a white household and a Black household. And I think we all generally would agree that home ownership is one of those fundamental ways that you can build wealth and equity. Now, I think everybody needs to go read The Color of Law and understand why we built those systems and who they were intended to benefit. But this is where we are. I hope I'm optimistic and hopeful that, like Mike's saying, and Malika, I mean, you might want to speak to this as well, about how things are changing.
Yeah, they are changing. I mean, and I won't belabor the point, but what I will say is that, we're seeing is Mike Carnathan just said, we're seeing a shift in our population. We're seeing, over the next 10 to 20 to 30 years, an increase in minority population and the other way around for the majority population. But in addition to that, you saw on the maps that Mike shared as it relates to, housing, education, access to healthcare, access to, a decent education, to proper, it really just runs into all of those, different variables if we're ever going to really deep change, not just in our region, but in this country, in my opinion. So.
And another question, y'all, in a lot of your studies, you've said that Metro Atlanta is getting older. And one of the things that the Metro Atlanta Speak survey showed is really the gulf between, your older and younger folks who live in Metro Atlanta. And I didn't know if you believe that this is going to continue and become exacerbated as we become older.
I would start on that. I will answer that a little bit. If you look at some of the data that these two guys have shared over the last year and years, you can go less than 10 miles in a zip code and have a life expectancy of a 20 to 25 year gap. You can live longer, less than 10 miles away, if you will, just based on your zip code. And that's huge when you think about our Metro Atlanta region in terms of, life expectancy. And there are so many variables around that as this entire region is getting a lot older. It's one of the fastest growing cohorts. So, when you think about the work that we're doing in aging services, they're actually starting a strategic plan called Living Beyond Expectations. And it really touches on what you just asked about. What do we do around the fact that, we are living longer, but also if you just go just less than 10 miles away, you may live 20 years longer because of the environmental factors. And so I think that's something that, we're consciously looking at and exploring here at the ARC, but it is a real thing. It is happening. And we're going to try to look and, again, unbundle that data as we move through that process with our aging community.
So one of the questions from the audience is, have you looked at how the level of household educational attainment by jurisdiction correlates to the impact on the economy of the area or race relations? Is that one of your data points, is educational attainment?
We do, yeah, you can look at every question we asked in Metro Atlanta Speaks broken out by educational level. Here we focused on race and age differences, but we also have income and educational attainment. And so I encourage the person who asked that to go to that dashboard where you can look at all these questions and choose all these different cuts. And, you'll find, again, very stark differences in how people answered these questions based on educational level.
So
Wait,
Go ahead.
Maria, just for a second. I mean, to get at that question a little more, can you talk for a second about the Learn for Life dashboard? Because I think that's a valuable resource as well in understanding where our children are with respect to their, and I don't want to use educational performance, but the differences between them right now and what that means for us as a region long term.
Right, right. And so, Learn for Life, I mean, again, when we talk about the system in Metro Atlanta, that system spans from cradle to career. And so one of the things that Learn for Life is really uncovering is that these disparities begin early in life. These inequities begin early in life. And so what you'll see with these dashboards, if you go to the Learn for Life website, you'll see this, big gaps in educational achievement, really beginning as, really honestly, it begins in pre-K and before, but you'll see it, in some of these testing scores, and they persist throughout. But one thing that we have found is that if you can equalize, in other words, if you can sort of knock it out of the park in third grade reading, in other words, if you're proficient in reading at third grade, those that achievement lasts for the rest of your life. In other words, we don't see these educational gaps, these achievement gaps in high school and going to college if everyone is reading at the same level at third grade. And so there are some things that we can do.
Yeah, this might be the most positive data slide we have.
Yep.
We're getting the wrap signal here, but one questioner was asking, how can you do the survey? This is not something that people can choose to do. It's randomly done, right? Is that accurate? So to keep it statistically significant, it's not one of those where anyone can answer the questions, right? My last question, and I had really hoped we would have more time to do about this, but can you give just like a 1-minute summary of what are some of the things ARC is doing to help the community better navigate through these issues of income disparities, of spatial differences in our region? How are ways that people can become engaged with ARC to get some of these issues dealt with? Come on, who can do it in 1 minute?
I wish we could pull back up the logo slide for just a second. I mean, if you are not already programmed into some of our leadership programs in particular, I think that's critical because those programs become a great leaping off point. And a lot of people, even in our programs for our high school students, there was a city council person in the city of Atlanta who was a MARC student and graduate who's now on the city council. And so CPA, RLI, yeah, they're great ways to connect with this larger regional community. And Malika knows this very well. We will be doing a lot of work next year through our alumni engagement network. And that doesn't mean that you have to be an alumni exactly, but we're really going to double down on this. This webinar is one of those ways we've pivoted during the pandemic to present more information when we can't do it in person. So there's lots of opportunities to engage with us on this. Mike, I mean, I don't know how many data councils you serve on now. Even I can't keep track. Malika, so many places we meet the community to talk about these issues. But the fun thing I'd say in my last 1 minute of my 1 minute is those programs that we've already talked about, like Learn for Life, are us really engaging in a new style of regionalism where we are partnering with other regional entities to try to work on these issues in the best way we can. And so, Mike, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, or Malika. I think this is critical because we're trying to figure out better ways to communicate.
We're getting the signal that our time is up, but I just want people to know who are listening in that there is a way for them to engage in becoming more involved in our region and to become proactive in helping address several of the issues that we face. And I also am getting a message too. Someone wants the link to Metro Atlanta Speaks for them. And also, if you asked a question that was not answered, ARC will do its best to answer all the questions post-webinar. So I'm now going to kick it off to Olivia. Thank you, Mike 1, Mike 2, and Malika for helping. Oh, wait, go ahead. Yeah.
Why am I Mike 2?
Mike 1.
And together,
Actually, no, we got to take a point of privilege. Malika, you came up with this. What are we today?
M cubed. M.
Cubed. Okay, Mike cubed. Well, all our names begin with M, so we can be M. What is it? Not square. So,
M quad.
okay, they just put the link to Metro Atlanta Speaks up there. Make a copy of it before we sign off. And
we get to decide on the time, so Jared and Olivia can be. It's okay if we run a little bit over.
okay, Olivia, did you go ahead and wrap it up?
Yeah, well, thank you to all of our lovely panelists. This was a great discussion, and thank you for everybody who is attending, who also participated and asked questions, or for just listening. We really appreciate you all joining us this afternoon. A recording of the webinar will be available by the end of the week on the webinar page. I'm sharing that link with you again now. But you will also receive a follow-up email that should have a link to the recording in that as well. So as a reminder, we will have another webinar next Tuesday, December 15th. That one will be at 1 p.m. It will be on equity in arts funding. So you can join us for a first look at data on how Metro Atlanta's philanthropic foundations have funded Black arts and cultural organizations over the last 10 years, as well as a conversation about what funding should look like in the future. So that will be a really exciting one. Also, if you want to kind of continue some of the themes of this conversation into another sort of regional arena. So on behalf of the Atlanta Regional Commission and our presenters, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you have a great day. Thank you.
Everyone.
Happy holidays.
See ya.